Good evening, afternoon or morning, Movie Cat is at the microphone, and today I will tell you about the satirical comedy which is based on a true story. The death of Stalin.
Our General Secretary is lying in a puddle of indignity.
And in order not to lose this channel, I recommend to subscribe. The director of Radio Moscow, who is currently supervising a symphonic music concert, receives a telephone order from Stalin to send him a recording of this concert. The radio director hangs up and hears applause from the audience. The concert is over, but the only problem is no one recorded it. In a panic, the director puts the musicians and the spectators, who have not yet left, in their seats to play the same concert one more time, but this time to the recording and, of course, with even louder applause. Meanwhile, the top government of the country is doing the usual things. Secret police chief Beria brings execution lists. Stalin signs it, and Nikita Khrushchev, the first secretary of the Moscow Regional Committee, tells hilarious stories. How in Kolyma he threw grenades at prisoners just to keep warm. At a concert in an orchestra, the pianist refuses to play exclusively for Stalin because he is to blame for the death of her father and brother. However, radio director manages to convince her by significantly increasing the fee. Such nervous shocks lead the conductor to faint, in which he hits his head on a fire bucket. The NKVD officers go for another conductor, and when he was ready to say everything and even tell names, they explained to him that the orchestra just needs him. Already empty spectator seats are forcibly filled with passers-by from the street to create the acoustics of a full hall. Ordinary people listen to Mozart while eating pickles. The concert is recorded, and the director gives the record to the messenger from the NKVD. At the last moment, the pianist comes running and inserts a note into the envelope, as she says, expressing the full depth of her feelings. In a hurry, her message is not checked. Stalin, listening to the concert before going to bed, also finds a note in which the girl wishes him, from the bottom of her heart, to die. Stalin laughs and then faints. Seems he gets a heart attack and he falls down on the floor. The guards outside hear the fall of the body, but in order not to take the initiative, they decide to do nothing. In the morning, the woman who brought breakfast finds Stalin. Secret police chief Beria orders not to touch anything and not to call anyone. At home, Nikita Khrushchev, who has chosen a role of a kind of jester, is trying to remember what made Stalin laugh yesterday, when suddenly he receives a call about the incident and moves out, dressing his suit, pulling over his pajamas. He knows that arriving early means gaining an advantage. Lavrenti Beria is the first to get directly into the leader's office. He is in no hurry to help Stalin, leaving him in a puddle of his own urine. First, Beria quickly finds folders with incriminating evidence on the top of the government and immediately burns his own one and passes the rest through the window to his subordinate. The second to arrive is Georgy Malenkov, Stalin's deputy. They decide not to call the doctors, because the best doctors they shot themselves far ago. And if they call the bad ones, the awakened leader will clearly not forgive this. Having gathered the entire composition of ministers, it was decided, call at least some doctor. If Stalin recovers, the doctor was good, and if not, there will be no one to punish them. Doctors say that Stalin will not wake up, and the ministers are starting to act. The successors are divided into two coalitions. First, Khrushchev and Labor Minister Lazar Kaganovich, who have just begun to figure out how to beat their opponents. The second group is more successful. Malenkov is Stalin's deputy and therefore the legal successor. His actions are directed by the cunning, unprincipled Beria, secret police chief. The head of the NKVD causes Moscow to entry and exit, then places his people in all key positions, removing army representatives. Stalin is dying. He is loaded into a coffin and the entire government staff leaves the leader's residence, simultaneously competing to see whose car will go first. A minute later, NKVD officers arrive at the house to put everything valuable and not nailed to the floor in their pockets, and the witnesses in the ground. In the evening, Khrushchev comes to Vyacheslav Molotov, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, to talk and enlist his support. However, literally 10 minutes later, Beria arrives there, generously freeing Molotov's wife, whom he himself had previously punished for alleged state betrayal. Having won this round, according to tradition, Beria goes to the basements of the NKVD to celebrate this on a mattress with a young girl who was prepared in advance by his subordinates. In the morning the girl is given to her parents. At the meeting, the committee votes for Malenkov as general secretary and Beria as his deputy. More than half vote out of fear, and Khrushchev has no choice but to agree with the decision. Khrushchev, like a competitor, gets the onerous task of organizing Stalin's funeral. Beria decides to make politics a little more liberal. He stops the executions and declares an amnesty in the Gulag, pretending to be a good-natured man and a humanist. Next, Beria invites church representatives to the funeral. He says them that Stalin was a villain and a radical, and the new government has softer views and a reformist course. Beria's comrade in arms, Malenkov, although higher in position, is a pure puppet and does not take part in decision-making, and therefore is surprised every time when he sees the result. Khrushchev suffers at the funeral. Instead of important ministerial decisions, here he needs to choose what shape the curtains will be, and how many mourning wreaths will be enough. The commander of the Soviet army, Marshal Georgy Zhukov, also comes here. The war hero demands a drink in order to at least a little quell his anger from the fact that Beria replaced the Red Army soldiers in positions in the capital with his own people. Khrushchev, meanwhile, in order to destabilize the situation, orders to let transport to Moscow under the pretext that people must say goodbye to the leader. Naturally, the surging crowds of people swept away the NKVD officers from their block posts, and the officers, not being big humanists, opened fire. As a result, within a few hours, 1,500 civilians were killed. Beria is furious. He refuses to hold his people responsible for these deaths and threatens first Khrushchev for his initiative, and then shakes an incriminating evidence in front of the remaining Presidium's members. The ministers are intimidated, and Khrushchev decides to play this card against Beria. He proposes Zhukov to use the deaths of people on the streets as a reason to bring the army into Moscow and then overthrow Beria. The marshal was just waiting for such an offer. Zhukov claims that if he defeated Germany, then he can also deal with the shit in the West. However, in order not to remain extreme himself, Zhukov sets a condition: all members of the Presidium, even Beria's comrade in arms, Malenkov, must pass judgment to Beria. Gathering at dawn in the forest, most of the Presidium pronounce Beria a death sentence. Khrushchev is trying to win over the last member, Malenkov, but he resists out of fear and uncertainty. However, Khrushchev is bluffing and confirms to Zhukov that the decision is unanimous. While the government makes speeches to the people, the military, on the orders of the commander-in-chief, conducts preparations. An alarm button is installed under the future meeting table, and the military sits down to wait in the toilet. Zhukov also comes with 2 machine guns under his military coat. Of course, nobody didn't dare to search him at the entrance. During the meeting, suddenly Khrushchev interrupts Beria with his planned agenda, accuses him of usurping power, and presses the button. Marshal bursts in, hits Beria in the face, and then arrests him. The military are scattering along the corridors to catch the NKVD officers on duty. On the street, the main forces of the army are pulled up, and the rest of Beria's people are relieved of their powers. The members of the Presidium are not going to leave Beria alive, because no one needs retaliatory revenge with the secret police chief's long arms. Therefore, Khrushchev literally forces Secretary General Malenkov to sign a guilty verdict. Meantime, the cowardly Malenkov cannot read it, so the same Khrushchev takes the initiative. For numerous repressions, murders and corruption of minors, the ex-head of the NKVD is sentenced to death. Beria asks for a fair trial, then threatens and finally begs him not to kill. But it's too late. Beria is quickly shot in the head and then burnt. That's all, says Zhukov. Khrushchev and Molotov look at the general secretary and agree that a weak person is not worthy of this position. In 1956, Khrushchev removed other party members, including Molotov and Malenkov. Thank you for watching. Why do you think this film was banned in Russia? Please write in the comments. Also give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe.